Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be tackling something that maybe sounds a little bit dry at first,
Yeah.
but
It does sound a little dry.
I promise you,
Yeah.
it's way more relevant
Oh, yeah?
than you might think, and that is
Absolutely.
statistical power.
Yeah.
We're going to be fixing specifically on how this plays out
Yeah.
in something called,
Moderated multiple regression, or MMR.
yeah, MMR for short,
Yeah.
moderated multiple regression.
That's a mouthful.
I know.
Yeah.
So,
We could call it MMR.
yeah,
How about that?
we'll call it MMR.
Yeah.
MMR. You can think of this
A good one.
as a way to see if a third variable
Uh-huh.
is messing with the relationship between two other things.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a really common technique.
Okay.
That's used in all sorts of research.
So give us an example.
Yeah, so let's imagine like you're trying to figure out if those online brain training games that everybody's always talking about
Yeah.
actually work better for older folks or younger folks.
Okay.
Right. So in that case,
Yeah.
age would be your moderator.
Okay.
Because you're trying to see if age changes the relationship between playing those brain training games
Right.
and memory improvement.
Okay. Got it. So far, so good.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
And this is really what today's deep dive is all about.
Okay.
We're looking at a 1994 paper
All right.
by Stone Romero, Alliger, and Ageen.
Agweens.
And they basically...
Drinks with beer.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And they basically drop a truth bomb on the research world.
Oh, really?
They do.
No truth bomb?
They use these things called Monte Carlo simulations,
Oh, yeah.
which are kind of like running a gazillion virtual experiments.
Yeah, that's a really good way to think about it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like you're creating this fake world
Uh-huh.
where you can control everything
Right.
and test over and over again
Yeah.
to see how often.
So you can kind of see how the statistics play out
Yeah.
over many different scenarios.
And what they found is that when the groups that you are comparing
Mm-hmm.
are really different in size,
Right.
MMR can be pretty unreliable.
Yes, it can.
Like,
That's a big problem.
yeah.
Yeah.
Think about it this way.
Okay.
It's like if you are trying to figure out
Mm-hmm.
which study method works better,
Okay.
but you have a class of 200 students
Right.
who are using flashcards
Okay.
and only 20 students who are using spaced repetition,
Okay. I see.
right? Even if spaced repetition is way better,
Right.
it might not look that way statistically,
Right.
just because the groups are so uneven.
Because those numbers are so different.
Right, yeah.
So,
And that's what they found
yeah.
in this paper.
And they found that this power problem,
Uh-huh.
this ability to actually spot a real difference
Yeah.
when it
We
exists,
find this sick.
is way worse than most people realize.
Mhm.
Way worse than people realize.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of researchers, they kind of just,
Don't even think about it.
yeah, they don't think about it.
Yeah.
They just plug the numbers into the computer, and
Yeah.
whatever the result is, they think, okay, that's the truth.
Right.
Oh.
So it's not enough to just look at the results of a study
Right.
and just take them at face value.
Yeah.
You really need to look under the hood
Yeah.
and ask yourself,
Ask those tough questions.
yeah, like, were the groups balanced?
Yeah. How big were the samples?
Yeah. Was the study actually designed to detect
Yeah,
a real effect?
Exactly.
If not, that no effect
The
conclusion.
no effect could be completely misleading.
Yeah. Could be totally misleading.
Yeah.
So
It's a big deal.
it is a big deal.
Yeah.
And we're going to,
What kind of talk about?
yeah, we're going to dig into that a little bit more
Yeah.
in just a minute.
Okay.
Sounds good.
But first.
All right. So this isn't just a theoretical problem.
Right.
Stone, Romero, Alliger, and Aguines.
Yeah.
We're dig into some real-world research
Okay.
where this power problem has likely skewed the results.
Okay. So, like, what kind of research?
So there's this one study
Yeah.
that looked at whether certain tests could predict how well trade apprentices would perform on the job.
Okay. Yeah. So
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
You give them a test.
Yeah. Are you going to be good at this job?
Are they going to cut it
Right.
as a plumber or an electrician or whatever it is?
Yeah.
But they decided to break down the apprentices
Okay.
by gender and race to see if those factors played a role.
Right.
Seemed like a good idea at the time.
Huh.
The problem is
Yeah.
huge differences in the size of the groups, way more men than women,
Okay.
and a much bigger proportion of white apprentices
Yeah.
compared to non-white apprentices.
I see.
So because of those lopsided groups,
Okay.
their analysis might not have had enough statistical power.
To tell if gender or race truly made a difference
Let me see.
and how well the tests predicted job performance.
So it's like if you were trying to judge a chili cook-off,
Okay.
but one person brought a gallon of chili,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody else just brought a small bowl.
Right. Yeah.
Even if some of those small bowls were amazing,
Yeah.
that giant pot of chili might unfairly skew the results.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Okay.
So that makes you wonder,
yeah.
how many studies are out there
Right.
claiming no effect when there really is an effect?
Right.
Simply because the study wasn't designed to pick it up.
Right, because it wasn't powerful enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so then the question becomes,
Yeah.
what can we do about it?
Well,
Most of us aren't designing these big research studies.
right.
Yeah.
Most of us are just reading about them.
Yeah.
You know, maybe on the internet
Exactly.
or in the news.
Yeah, we're just bombarded with this stuff.
Exactly. So that's where being an informed consumer of information comes in.
Okay.
Right. So whenever you see a study, especially one that claims no effect,
Yeah.
take a closer look at those sample sizes and group proportions.
Okay, so look for those lopsided chili pots.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it.
Right. So if things seem unbalanced,
Uh-huh.
that no effect conclusion might not be the whole story.
It's like that saying
Yes.
absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence.
That's a good one.
Right. Just because a study didn't find an effect
Yeah,
doesn't necessarily mean there isn't one.
right.
It might just be that their statistical lens
Yeah.
wasn't powerful enough to see it.
Yeah, they just couldn't see it.
Okay, so they're just looking through the wrong end of the telescope.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like they're trying to find a
Yeah.
tiny little ant
Yeah.
with a telescope.
Right.
You need a microscope for that.
Okay. Now, the good news is that Stone, Romero, Elijah, and Aguini,
Right.
they don't just point out the problem.
Right.
They actually give researchers some tools
You do.
to help them
Yeah.
figure out if their studies have enough power.
Right. There are ways to calculate it.
Oh,
And they talk about those in the paper.
so it's not like they're saying all research is useless.
Oh, no, not at all.
They're basically giving researchers a way
Right.
to be more upfront.
To be more transparent
Yeah.
about the limitations
Yeah, about the limitations of their study,
of their study,
which is pretty important.
which is huge.
Right.
Like, if you know that your sample size is small,
Yeah.
you should just say that.
Right. Be upfront about it.
Be upfront about it.
Yeah.
And say, you know, we couldn't find an effect, but
Yeah.
that may be because our sample size was small.
Right. And maybe somebody else can come along
Exactly.
and do a bigger study.
With a bigger sample size,
Right.
and maybe they'll find something.
And maybe they will find an effect.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's all about transparency.
Right.
If researchers are open about the potential weaknesses. Yeah.
Of their study design,
Uh-huh.
it helps everyone interpret the findings more accurately.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
But they also talk about
Yes.
some alternatives to MMR,
Yes.
right? Because sometimes,
Sometimes it's just not the right tool for the job.
right.
Like, for example,
Yeah.
let's say you're looking at differences between men and women.
Okay.
Right. That's a naturally occurring group.
Right. You can't randomly assign somebody
You can't just...
to be male or female.
Exactly.
Right.
So in those cases,
Oh, okay.
a different kind of test
Okay.
called a chi-squared test
Okay.
might actually be more powerful
Interesting.
than the standard test that's used in MMR.
Okay. So there are other options out there.
There are.
And researchers just need to think carefully
Absolutely.
about which statistical approach makes the most sense.
Right, for their particular research question.
Yeah.
And for their
And
data.
then your data, right?
Yeah.
And here's another thing I thought was really interesting.
Sometimes researchers take a variable that's naturally continuous,
Mm.
like age,
Right.
and chop it up into categories.
Yeah, like young and old.
Right, like young and old.
Exactly.
But doing that
Yeah.
can actually reduce your statistical power.
It can.
Really. So it's actually better to keep things continuous
It is.
whenever possible.
If you can
Well,
keep it continuous because you retain more information that way.
Okay.
And that gives your analysis more statistical oomph.
More statistical oomph. I like it.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've talked about the problem of low power and MMR,
Yeah.
how to spot it,
Uh-huh.
and some alternative approaches.
Yeah.
But before we wrap things up, I have to ask. This
Yeah.
paper is from 1994.
Is
Is it still relevant today?
That's a great question.
I mean, things have changed a lot in
And
the
they're-
research world.
Oh,
A
yeah.
lot since 1994.
Right. But statistical methods
Yeah.
are constantly evolving.
But the core issue of statistical power
Right.
is timeless.
Right. It's like understanding gravity.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're using a slingshot or a rocket.
Right.
Gravity still applies.
Gravity still applies.
Yeah.
So even though things have changed a lot
Uh,
since 1994,
uh,
this fundamental problem
yeah.
is still something we
Yeah.
need to be aware of.
Especially in today's world,
Yeah.
where we're just bombarded with all this
With
data and research.
Yes.
Right.
So understanding statistical power helps us cut through the noise
Okay.
and be more critical consumers of information.
Be more discerning.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a lot more empowered
Yeah.
to scrutinize those research headlines.
Me too.
This has been a really illuminating deep dive.
It has.
Thanks for joining us. So we've learned that just because a study says there's no effect doesn't mean there really isn't one,
Right.
especially if they have those wonky sample sizes.
Right.
Or they chose the wrong statistical test.
Exactly.
But this whole conversation has got me thinking,
Yeah.
what other areas of research
Mm.
might be vulnerable to this power problem?
Oh, that's a good question.
Like, are we missing important findings?
Yeah.
Because the studies weren't designed to pick them up.
That is the million-dollar question.
Right.
And it's one that we should all be asking ourselves
Yeah.
as we navigate this increasingly data-driven world.
Right.
Think about it.
Yeah.
We rely on research
Yeah.
to inform decisions
Uh-huh.
in healthcare,
Yeah.
education,
Policy.
policymaking,
Yeah, pretty much every aspect of our lives.
pretty much every aspect.
It's almost scary to think
Yeah.
that some of those decisions
Right.
might be based on flawed conclusions
It's possible.
just because of this power problem.
Yeah. And that's why
It makes you wonder how much we're missing.
yeah, and that's why it's crucial
Yeah.
to be aware of this issue
Okay.
and to approach research finding. Yeah.
With a healthy dose of skepticism.
Okay.
Don't just blindly accept what
Yeah.
you read.
Question everything.
Dig a little deeper.
Right.
Ask questions.
Yeah.
And remember that even well-intentioned research
Yeah.
can have limitations.
So the takeaway here is that being a savvy consumer of information
Yes.
isn't just about understanding the results of a study.
Right.
It's about understanding,
How those results were generated
yeah,
and what potential biases
yeah.
might be lurking beneath the surface.
It's about recognizing that research is a process.
It is.
And like any process,
Right.
it's susceptible to flaws.
It is.
But by understanding those flaws, by understanding things like statistical power,
Right.
we can make more informed decisions
Exactly.
about what information we trust
Yeah.
and how we apply it to our lives.
Well,
It's like being a detective,
it is.
looking for clues
Yeah.
and piecing together the evidence.
You got it.
And sometimes,
The absence of evidence
yeah,
is the biggest clue of all.
it can be.
So as you encounter new research,
Yeah.
remember what we've talked about today.
Ask those critical questions.
Yeah, like how big were their sample sizes?
Yeah, were the groups balanced?
Did they pick the right statistical tools?
And if something seems off,
Yeah.
don't be afraid to dig a little deeper.
That's great advice.
Yeah,
And I think that's a perfect note to end on.
I agree.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of statistical power.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you've come away with a renewed appreciation for the importance of critical thinking and the power of questioning assumptions.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.